12.7 billion engagements. Sometimes the numbers that we tell internally, they're massive, and it feels like it loses a bit of its value because they're so big. This is not a magic number.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Attention Shift podcast. If you're enjoying the show, remember to like, subscribe wherever you're listening or watching to us. So this week, we're going to go inside the digital engine behind one of the most famous, historic and prestigious sporting competitions anywhere in the world. The Winter Olympics in Milano this year delivered 4 times the digital engagement of Beijing. LA 28 is being built to be bigger again, and the man leading the partnerships behind all of this is with us today. Yannick Amram, Head of Digital Partnership at the IOC. Yannick, welcome to the show, and would you mind giving us an introduction?
Yes, thank you very much for having me in the podcast. I appreciate the word leading.
Our pleasure.
Sometimes it's not so easy to explain that you're leading, but I try to at least. This is what my LinkedIn says. So I guess I'm trying to lead on this.
I know what you mean. I try to.
So yes, I've been working in sports organization for the past 20 years. The IUC has been the one main goal in my career, should I say, but that doesn't mean that the other organizations I work with were not important as well. I specifically want to mention the Amaury Sport organization, ASO, which is famous for having done the Tour de France, Marathon de Paris, Dakar Rally. They have about 70 events per year. So this also is a bit of a shock between having 70 different events to deliver per year to once every 2 years. And I joined the IOC around February 21, so during the COVID period. Quite a peculiar moment to join. And I joined as a senior manager, and then it was not until early 26 that I became head of. And today, I'm leading digital partnerships. We're a team of 3 to 4 sometimes, depends on the situation. And really, our focus is within TMS. So TMS is the structure that is within the IOC, which is called Television Marketing Services, which is where we make the revenues. So where we sell the media rights, the sponsorship, licensing, everything that is revenues is within TMS, and I sit within the media team. My direct manager being the VP of Media, Jérôme Parmentier.
Fantastic. Okay, so you mentioned you've been there 5 years, and interesting, when you were at Amaury before, like I said, as much as you did all of those events over a long period of time, now what you have is one big event when all of those events are in a short window, I guess. So it's a very different approach to it. We'll start, I guess, almost at the end now, or most recently, where you've taken over as the head of that unit, leading that unit. What did that, I guess, having been there the previous 3-4 years before that, what change did that bring for you in terms of how you were going to operate, obviously going into a major event not long afterwards?
The reality is that it all comes down, I think, to the size of the team, because ultimately the operational part is still very present on a day to day. Because we're not such a big team, despite I would assume people thinking that the Olympics is such a big organization. It is not. It comes down to just a couple of teams with a couple of resources trying to maximize and to bring the ambitions of the Olympic Games. Of course, with the organizing committee, the OCOG, we love acronyms. So Paris 24, Milano 26, LA 28. So we try to work as much as possible with them. But like I said, because of the operational part, the reality is that I still feel sometimes like I'm an intern or a senior manager, and then ahead
And
of
is that
when
because
it
the
comes.
organization's been is that because the organization's been around for so long almost that you're the custodian in a relatively short period, but the thing itself has been so big and so vast and so established globally for so long?
I mean, the one specificity that I would call out is that our team would be known as the um, uh, innovation team, sort of say.
Yeah.
in a world or an environment that is moving very slowly. So we would be the team that really are trying to make a difference with innovative aspects such as the creator program, such as working on content hubs, such as working on features with
Yeah.
platforms who constantly change and ask different things out of you. So this is what I mean by um, I'm also an intern because I keep on learning as well. I keep on being very
Yeah. Yeah.
operational. I do think that I have the strategy at hand, but ultimately being the head of just allows me to be able to speak to some people of my seniority so that I can propose some of the projects and hopefully gain
Yeah.
some time. But ultimately, the IUC is actually a very open organization that allows at every level to bring new projects and new activations. But to gain some time, the level of seniority is important. And then obviously what head of means is that I'm responsible in case something bad happens. So that's an easy one to figure.
Now it's interesting the way you described that as well. He said like you know you've got a hand on the strategy always there, but ultimately day to day the world outside keeps on turning, things change, so you have to actively activate tactically. And but still with that strategy in mind, we had a similar conversation with some of my colleagues yesterday where we were talking, and we talked openly about like sometimes it feels like as a business we're pivoting from one thing to another. Like no, it's not that we're pivoting one thing to another. It's still with the overarching guiding light, the strategy, the thing we want to achieve. But even though we might want something to be a certain kind of way, outside things are changing all the time, and we have to pivot accordingly to make sure that we are reaching the people we need to reach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the reality also is that as we get close to games time, the roles become so operational, but also
Yeah,
so clearly defined that, like I said, everyone is there to make sure that your colleague's activation works out. It's not just your program. It's not
yeah,
just your strategy. It's everyone's strategy. Specifically when it comes to digital, because as much as we want to say, here is the person in charge of the digital, that's not true. Digital is part of every remit. It's how can you make sure that it's coherent for everyone, how to make sure that
yeah,
the the strategy that you want to develop benefits for everyone. It's not going to be your side project or your side gig on working specifically with the platform
yeah.
because it's going to impact everyone.
Yeah, I imagine that's probably what I mean, look, I think it's a challenge for everyone probably over the last 5, 10 years where I think digital was always put almost like as a digital's a thing on its own. It's kind of like, no, digital's just everywhere now and it's actually part of everything we do and it needs to be interlinked to everything. Like, it's almost like the fact that we're even calling it that anymore. It's just ultimately how we create content, how we communicate, how we connect. It's just
Absolutely.
ultimately fundamentally integrated into everything.
Absolutely. And which is why the relation with the platforms is key. Uh, before you could think about the strategy around digital as an added piece to the rest. Now it's not. Now it's one of the main components, and the relation that I
Yes.
try to develop with the platforms are key, and they cannot happen at the last minute. And especially having such a mega event as the Olympics, um, because again, I think no organization likes surprises, but if there's one specifically that doesn't like surprises, is ours. And we don't have practice time. We don't have tests, period.
Yeah.
Unlike other organizations that have like events every
Yeah.
day, every week, or a couple of months, we have one every 2 years. And they last 20
Yeah.
days. So those 20 days must be perfect. And as you can imagine, they aren't. And again, what would be the fun of being on the ground if everything was perfect? But um, it actually becomes the fun part. And this is where um, everyone, as I mentioned, during games time actually becomes an intern because we do specifically things that are almost that are not part of your remit. I think almost
Yeah.
30% of the work I do during games time has nothing to do with my daily job.
Yeah. But the reality is you pitch in, right? Because everyone needs to pitch in to be able to get the job done. Because like you know, like I said, I guess short window, the clock's ticking. It just needs doing, and it can't not get done. So you have to pitch in and do it, which makes sense, right? Clearly, there's a mindset there in the organisation that everyone has to pitch in and help each other, and sometimes you have to dig out your colleagues right when they need a
Of
hand.
course, of course, of course. With the digital team, we work very closely with our social media team. Nothing that we could do would work without having a solid social team. They're the
Yeah,
ones who are delivering the content. They're the ones who are following the trends, making sure that everything we do makes sense, drives engagement and reach. But most notably, they're the ones who make sure that um, we keep on having value on top of the IP assets and whatnot. It's on top
yeah,
of it, games time and outside of games time. Those are really we talk a lot about games time, but the what do we call flame to flame, which is between games time, is as
yes.
key if you want to deliver a successful games.
No, look, I was lucky enough to go to the Paris Olympics. I went to some of the table tennis, some of the rowing. I was just in and around the city, and it was an amazing experience. But interesting, what I wanted to do is wanted to go back to when you started at the IOC, which is 2020, right, Tokyo, which was a very different Olympics because we were constrained by COVID, so no spectators, no venue access for creators, which we're going to come on to later on in this. Like, what's fundamentally changed? I guess what learnings did you almost get from that experience? Is there anything that it accelerated that you could then take forward? Because I guess in adversity like that, yes, it's difficult, but there are always things that come out of it that makes you think and function perhaps in a different way.
Um, I think that one of the things that have really changed between Tokyo 2020 and now is really how before we were really focused on delivering IOC only KPIs, which would be new revenues, engagement, and reach on our handles. And the way it evolved was because of the evolution of the importance of the digital strategy within our stakeholders, whether media right
Yeah,
holders or sponsors. This meant that we had to now think about how to support them as much as we could and make sure that those partnerships did take into account the wider Olympic movement and not just the Olympics. This means, uh, a quick example, it meant, for instance, facilitating features that were only accessible to the IOC, but to the rest of the stakeholders. We're thinking about
yeah,
geogating features, we're talking about content hubs. It's not just about serving the IOC, is how can we serve our stakeholders and make sure that they benefit from whatever we can negotiate. This doesn't mean that they don't negotiate, and we encourage obviously our MRHs and our tops to have their own deals with the platforms, but with the strength of the rings, it clearly allows us to have a better um, negotiation with them so that everyone can benefit from whichever deal we come with. So that would be the main difference. Is really the evolution of how we saw the importance of digital partnerships from a very internal perspective to a more supporting strategy.
and were you interesting? So, were obviously Tokyo came played out. It played out. Were at that point were you able, almost like I'm sure it was already in the mindset of ultimately like the idea of how are we going to lean more into digital, and also we're going back to 2020, like so 6 years ago. Did it enable you? Did it force you then to be able to do things that perhaps you weren't quite ready for as the IOC, but you realized there was an opportunity to start leaning more into digital as a means to connect with the global audience?
Um, 2020 was 6 years ago already, and at the
Yeah,
time, platforms weren't as mature as today, so there was a lot of education that had to happen internally on how we had to work with them. I think you have to remember that
yeah,
it was a time where I'm not confident a lot of organizations actually did contracts with platforms. They just benefited from the
yeah,
audience and the engagement, and they just put content hoping that somebody would buzz. It was not as structured as you would want
yeah.
to be,
True.
but one thing that was very clear from our standpoint was that we wanted to start providing value to our assets. We wanted to break a little bit the chain of um, put it for free and hope that it's gonna buzz and everyone's gonna benefit from it. To really understanding, hold on, there is a value to what we're providing the platforms with, whether it is a word mark, whether it is a logo, whether it is content commitment. If we're having such strong commitments with our stakeholders, and those companies are multi-billion commercial companies, so they're
Yeah,
not new to this game. And you have to understand that if they're doing it, they're benefiting from it. So, how do we leverage our value with what they want to do and steer away from that? Oh, we're giving you our audience and just enjoy and just put your content there. This is this is where the evolution also happened. We knew that we might potentially risk not working with the platform who didn't agree with what we thought,
yeah,
but it also meant that we wanted to make clear that though this is the way that we want things to evolve. We want to continuously
yeah,
show that whatever we put on social or elsewhere has a value.
yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, within your remit, you're covering platforms, social, entertainment and
Mhm,
content, and also search as well. So it's quite a broad remit, I guess, of different
mhm,
stakeholders and partners. I imagine that's changed
mhm.
massively compared to
Yeah.
like say even in the last 6 years. Um,
Yes.
how are how did you navigate that? Like you said, there it might be a platform doesn't want to lean into the way that you want to work. And look, and I guess the IOC are famous as well for how it manages access around the Olympics, how it works with its partners, but also how it makes sure that people who are not part of the partnership, I guess, are not impinging on anyone else's as rights as well. Like, how easy, hard is it to manage those relationships?
I mean, this to be honest is always a an evolving piece as the digital partnerships keep on evolving themselves. Today, they are much more mature as you would guess as 2 or 4 years ago. And I mean by that that um, we're able to project ourselves and what we do with them beyond a 6 months period. And this is critical.
Yeah,
Unlike our media rights deal or sponsorship deals, the one that we do with platforms are really short in time and they need to make sense with what is available now. So there isn't a model that was applicable 2 years ago that is applicable now. It's really
yeah,
always being renegotiated almost on a yearly basis. To give you an example, during games time, we do around 10 to 15 deals, which encompasses around 20 different platforms. All that to say that um, all of them at one point incorporate a specificity that was not their primary trait when we first worked with them. One would be, for
yeah,
instance, the search, Google search and TikTok search. If you told me
yeah,
that 2 years ago I would be working on how to create better discoverability on TikTok search, I would not have thought of that because that was not their primary focus, which was really about
yeah,
content, content, content. And now it's also trying to let in strategies within strategies from other platforms. Of course, the experience is very different, but in the end, the outcome remains for search discoverability, whether it's content, results,
yeah.
or simply news. So they really remain very different from one another, and there isn't one that looks like another from one year to the next. So it's really making sure that you keep on with the trend. And I mentioned it a bit earlier, but the relation with the platform is key. You cannot just expect things to fall down in the last couple of months because if you've not have a strategy that is based on how the platform is evolving, um, it's going to be much much less successful for sure.
So Milano was your first games as the
Yes.
head of the department, and the IOC's just published the final report, which gives a great summary of everything, all the work that the IOC did around the Olympics. And there are some really impressive numbers in there, like 12.7 billion engagements, four times what Beijing generated, and they are truly impressive because it's like a four times jump. But I guess it's the story behind the numbers, or what the IOC are doing differently to unlock that, because you do have big gaps between major events.
Yes. Yes, this is correct, and yeah, the number is really impressive. 12.7 billion engagements. Sometimes the numbers that we tell internally, they're massive, and it feels like it loses a bit of its value because they're so big. But this is not a magic number. This is really the result of a strategy that started way before games time. This is the work that we
Yeah,
do on the Flame to Flame because staying relevant outside of games time is the hardest bit of it all. Making sure that the audience and sustaining the number of followers that we have during games time, so they stay on our handles and continue watching our content and understanding how we where we're evolving is key. Equally, um, one of the things that have evolved and allows us to have such a big number on top of that flame to flame is having much more geo-localized content, so that
yeah,
we can speak to our fans about what they want to see and how it directly connects with them. And again, then there is a natural evolution of how athletes themselves are generating much more engagement and reach than before, which with new features allow us to combine content from our handles with their handles. Ultimately, it's just not our engagement that grew exponentially because you mentioned the 12.7, but if you look at the bigger picture, uh,
yeah,
the number got much bigger as well for the media right owners. They got much
yeah,
bigger for the sponsors, and they got much bigger for the athletes who are becoming much more agile and genuine on how they do their content, not during games time only, but outside. And we often talk about how creators promoting the games are important, but in the end, as individuals, our athletes are our main creators. Of course, media right
yeah.
owners are obviously the main source of content creation because they do have those rights. But don't get me wrong, but as individuals telling their Olympic journey, athletes and Olympians should be our main creators. And this is where we see that the growth and engagement happened massively for the wider Olympic movement.
Absolutely, it's like proof points, like you said there. Like when your mobile app is the number one sports app in 75 different territories, that is unusual for a sports rights holder, a league, or a team because it's usually the other people, the media rights owners whose apps are the most, who are top of those charts. I think that proves ultimately how you are interconnected and you are maintaining that interest from flame to flame. And I think, like I said, it is interesting to come onto that creator program because you are obviously you like you say, you've got athlete creators and you've got creator creators like those people who have become, perhaps started as niche, but then become experts in their own particular subject matters. So, obviously, what you did, I know you've done a lot of stuff with creators, but around that Olympics for Milano, you did the Olympic Creator Program, and I know that, like I said, I was aware of what NBC did around Paris as well, and obviously we all know about Snoop Dogg, who came in as a creator as well, which is probably the one that most people saw. Um, but you very much lent into creators for Milano, so what I guess triggered from your perspective that you were going to do that rather than obviously expect sort of media owners or look, we know that Unilever are spending so much now of their global marketing budget on influencers and creators, but you've come at it from your own perspective. What triggered that thought that you need to try and almost own that process?
So, um, this is going to be a bit of a lengthy answer, but at least you'll understand the context and what it comes down to. Actually, the Paris 24 Creator Program wasn't the first program. We talked about it, how it's hard to test such initiatives outside of games time.
Yeah,
But in 2023, you might not remember, but we had the Olympic Esports Week in Singapore. And there, we
of
tested
course.
for the first time esports creator program by bringing a couple of creators sanctioned by both the IOC and the platforms, and we collaborated to promote the esports week. It was successful, and we also saw how time consuming and operationally heavy this can turn out to be. So this was a really interesting
Yeah,
activation that existed and that we wanted to apply to Paris. Now, we then had to convince internally that adopting the creator program for games time was responding to one of our imperatives, which is to promote the games to a younger audience, but
yeah,
equally to a different audience. Now, once the education is done internally and that everyone is aligned, which is, to be transparent, 90% of the work, we had to have a clear alignment with the platforms on what it was that we expected out of that program. We didn't want to create a new category of media rights, to be clear. There was no
Yeah.
accreditation. There's no possibility to film within the field of play. Uh, we had to be very open on also what they wanted to create. Working with creators was making sure that we benefited from the authenticity of the content they did and their audience, which is why there was no script. We wanted to be as authentic as possible. And whenever we could have them
Yeah.
partner with our handles or athletes' handles, we would do it. But the narrative remained at the creator's hand. And partnering with the platforms also made it much more simpler, to be honest, as everyone had a stake in this and making a success versus us reaching out to an agency, calling and saying, we would like to work with that creator and have those number of pieces of content. This was absolutely not the idea. And again, this is what the power of the rings allows you to do. It's to unlock activations that no other organization would be able to. And I'm talking about through experience. Or maybe I
Yeah.
wasn't good enough to sell those programs in my other positions, but for sure, um, the
It
creator
was a different
program
time.
was
I think it was
was
a
a
different
hard.
time.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I think we see like we've been doing, and I can profess to the like the work that needs to go in as well, because we've been doing some work with creators at the moment around some live propositions, and many of the creators in this particular sport that we spoke to, yes, already did content around that particular competition, but weren't necessarily live stream watch on stuff like that. So not only do we have to identify them, we had to almost like educate them in terms of how do you do these? How do you create live experiences? How are you going to create a value exchange for them, for the rights holder, but also for the fans that ultimately you want to engage with them when they'll be watching the game that's occurring on one screen, but then they want to connect with their favorite creator on another screen. And that's in a very specific live remit. But like I said, I know for a fact from the work we've done that it's not just a badging exercise. You've got to really lean into these people and understand what they're getting out of it too, but not tell them what to do. Just give them the framework. So interestingly, out of those 12.7 billion engagements, obviously we like the creator program did 1.3 billion, right, which is a sizable number. Athletes, right, 4.9 billion engagements. So you're getting close to half of that, and I think that's certainly a space now where you see more and more. Like even recently, right? I don't know if the Murray brothers have just launched their own YouTube channel, and you've got Kevin Peterson doing it in cricket with the Switch. I think athletes now are starting to understand their worth as almost like that conduit. There's an authenticity, and we try not to use that word too much because everyone uses it. But there's an authenticity of the athlete being the one communicating their experience to the fans of them or the nation. Um, how have you found that partnership with them as well? Because obviously it's not their primary goal, right? To be making content. They want to go and win a gold medal or a silver or a bronze. So they're doing it in and around all of their training. How does that compare to working with creators who need to make great content for their audiences?
Sure. Um, so those are very different uh, types of people for us. Obviously, the creators. When it comes to the creators, we're trying to make sure that the guidelines for the creators again are as clear as possible, so that ideally that kind of program can also be implemented for other stakeholders, such as our MRHs. Because the last thing we want in the end is to have a competition. This is
Yeah.
absolutely not the purpose. The value
Yeah, it's got to be
is
complementary.
to
Yeah, yeah.
exactly the value is to initiate a way to democratize that kind of program so that everyone decides to onboard in it. For the platforms, I believe the added value is to have content that is done and that they can talk about it and make sure that their creators benefit from the right experiences. So the leaning in from the platforms is an easier one, but the hardest part is really to make sure that internally it's aligned so we don't see it as a competition. Now, when it comes to the athletes, this is another thing because with athletes, we also have different social guidelines. And
Yeah.
obviously, the more we're advancing, the more athletes are going to become uh, organic to the platforms. It's not whether they have a handle; it's how are they using that handle. We're getting more into that creator economy where athletes are telling their story and it's part of their journey and it's a way for them to
Yeah.
bring value and to potentially find some financial outcome, and we have to enable them to do this. And we had recent changes to our guidelines, which for instance allows them to create content in venue up to 1 hour before the sessions. So this has been a big
Yeah.
change because then they're able in venue to show to their fans how they're living it from the training bit. Equally, they are the only ones who can shoot content in the village. So the athlete village is that mythical place where you have all athletes together, and we don't have
Yeah.
broadcasters doing content there. We only have athletes. This is where they decide if they want to share their intimacy in a way that they can only do it. Then platforms come in with dedicated tools such as content hubs, which are, as you can imagine, content aggregators providing visibility to
Yeah.
whitelisted content. And in that case, we
Yeah.
make sure that the content hub surfaces and promotes Olympian's account. So that
Yeah,
number is
the
also due to
visibility.
the
Yeah, the visibility of the content, because there's so much content,
exactly,
right, that actually you need that
exactly.
curation to help people find it. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. This is exactly it. Um, we want to make sure that the all athletes, if they post content and it's surfaced, get as much visibility as any other athletes. It's not just about the top 1% that gets to have visibility. It's 100% of the athletes who decide to create content get to have the same opportunity of having visibility and whatever flows with that engagement and reach that comes with it. Um, this is why, for instance, you have creators such as the Muffin Man who are able to become popular because they're surfaced outside of just their sports elements, and then they're surfaced by the platforms, and then the platforms understand the value of the content they're providing, and they're surfacing as much as possible to create a rather um, how can I say, diversified
Yeah.
visibility of content. So yeah, you don't just end up having sports content.
Yeah, you can see, like, obviously the athlete is the behind the scenes access that, like I said, only they can provide. But
Mhm.
by them only doing it up to a tight period before the event itself, it gives the event window time to breathe. So those rights holders are able to do what they do best. And then with the creators around that too, in a lot of ways, they're holding it all together in between and giving you a fan perspective, but ultimately a fan perspective is someone who knows how to speak to a wider audience, who knows how to create content in such a way that it feels real and authentic, but good enough that people actually want to watch it.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, to be clear, creators are not even able to post field of play content, so they have to find other
Yeah,
types of content to create.
other
And
ways.
and um, we've had to work on what kind of content they could do that would not be competitive to right owners.
Yeah,
This had to be very
yeah,
clearly understood by everyone. And we would have not done again this kind of program if our right owners expressly were against it. It's also
yeah,
about
yeah,
embracing the evolution of content creation and trying to make sure of how to make the best of it versus always blocking it because of the fear of the outcome. And because we're such a protective
yeah,
organization, we could have leaned in that situation very easily. Actually, it did take a couple of months to validate the program, and many times we're very close to actually not doing it because of the fear of not being able to
yeah, yeah.
control what they do. But you have to have a little bit of faith and trust on the people you work with to have the right kind of content, because you're never going to be able to control everything either way.
I can only imagine the size of the content matrices that you had to try and work out what fits where. And like I said, you're a team of four, right? So it's not 20s and 30s and 40 people. There's a lot to think about here. in the lead up, during, post, and to be able to get it right. And I think, like I said, like I was very much aware, just as a fan of things that were going on. I think what I wanted to come on to as well is obviously you talked a lot about flame to flame there, right, as well, and that, obviously that space in between, and you have lent heavily into long form entertainment content as well, like Netflix documentaries. Obviously, Olympic Channel now that's been around for a few years, where you've done a lot of co-productions there as well. So you make sure that the IOC have got a hand in there to make sure it's represented in the right manner, but still obviously working on something like Netflix to make sure that you are getting the breadth and reach and there's an entertainment angle to it. Um, it's a completely different animal, right, to creator and short form content. So what role does that play for the IOC in the greater mix of everything we've just talked about?
So for sure, it has a much bigger role than before. And to be clear, this is thanks
Yeah.
to the team that David Heron, that I work with, works on. So he's the head of original content, and he's the one that completely changed the way we create and sell our original content. For a long time, we created content and it was available on the Olympic Channel, and the streaming platforms weren't as popular, and they were always seen as competitors to our broadcasters. So there was a natural uh, be careful on who you work with. But with the
Yeah.
evolution of the democratization of this kind of content, we had to make sure to embrace the evolution of the storytelling so that it actually becomes complementary to our media right owners storytelling. We're not trying to put our stakeholders in competition again or facing a already
Yeah.
decided situation where the movie is ready and then you show it to the broadcasters and they have no say in this. Everything is being discussed so that it actually benefits the Olympic Games and the stakeholders in the mid and long run. So this is very well thought, and it's not just a one off, it's a clear strategy that David is working on, and has been working on for the past 2 years and will continue. So
It comes across from everything you're explaining here that you all think very, very deeply about the reality is, look, you've got lots of different platform media partners that ultimately invest into your organization, the events as well. But at the same time, your remit is to try and get to everyone in the world in some way, shape, or form, and you're constantly trying to balance the two to make sure that the reach, the engagement, ultimately getting people to lean in is the best it could possibly at that moment in time based on what you know. But at the same time, those media partners are taken along on a journey and don't feel like they're being forgotten about as you're doing all of these things.
that's correct. You don't want to put them in the situation where they suddenly feel them that they can only tell part of the story. We want to involve them as much as they can, but we also want to take
Yeah.
advantage of other platforms who are providing you with more tactical opportunities that in the long run benefit to everyone.
Okay, so I just wanted to get onto sort of the last sort of pillar of what you're working on now
Yeah.
as well, and which is search and AI, and obviously now when AI is becoming search too, right? So that's evolving before our very eyes as well.
Yeah.
So that's the third leg of your remit, and I can see you smiling there. So I'm sure you're thinking about this all of the time now and how this is playing out. Um, what role did search actually play in Milano? But also, like, are you even able to have a vision of what it's going to look like in 2028 in LA because of the nature of how it's evolved? Even Google come out themselves saying like, search is not what it was anymore. We're moving towards an AI search world.
And the way to position the question would be to assume that there is one central AI source of truth, which is not the
Exactly. Yeah.
case at all. Uh, and
True.
and and although a partnership with search platforms is in my remit, we have colleagues optimizing the search area and the deals we do. And AI is just
Cool.
unfortunately not one category, and and if anything, we try to actually be very careful with it. We
Yeah. Yeah.
work with tools that allows us to create and generate and identify content through AI detection. We have um, very interesting programs in which we want to use AI to find future athlete detection and work with NOCs and federation on trying to figure out is there a way AI can help provide tomorrow's athletes. But for LA, everything is not defined yet. Yes, Google is
Yeah.
a local important partner of LA 28, and yes, AI is Gen AI is something that is clearly in the remit, but we're also trying to be careful on how it's being used so that we don't go into it too fast because there's no coming back from
Yeah.
it. I think this is also one of the things that it's hard to appreciate is uh, what do we do? What impact will it have? And are we able then to go back to a another situation? And this is where we're very careful on the use. For search, clearly we're trying to understand how this can be beneficial so that discoverability is here, whether it is content,
Yes.
whether it is .com or our apps, but we're trying to work on this, which is much trying to be as careful as possible because the implications, again, um, can be huge, not only for us, but for the whole movement.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, like, and if we think about it through the lens of, like, say, search and certainly AI, yes, you are doing commercial deals with these partners, but at the same time, you want to ensure that the IOC and the Olympic events are discoverable in all forms of search and AI as well. So it's trying to find that balance. I think that brings us on, I guess, the next question. Like, the central point of digital partnerships, and you've described this, is how it's about delivering new revenues, extracting value from digital offerings. So you can see sort of where I'm coming from that question. Like, when you sit down with a platform partner in whatever type of platform we're talking about there, like, what are you trying to build, and how do you try and find the balance between, like, ensuring that you are visible, because whether you've got a commercial relationship with them or not, but also making sure you're driving that opportunity to drive revenues to the Olympic movement.
Um, we try to incorporate as much as we can in every deal, whether it's revenue, reach, uh, engagement, features, promotion. We it's a bit of it all, but ultimately, it's making sure that we're not doing the same thing with every platform. Um,
Yeah,
we're trying to build consistency in the way our assets are valued, and that's key. So the value bit is key regardless of the platform. And yes, we want to work with as many platforms as possible, but we're not forced to as well. If there isn't a proper value exchange, we're fine not working with them. Uh, it's not just a value exchange for the IC, but for the wider movement as well. So
yeah,
we try to make sure that this makes sense with the platforms we work with, and because of also the limited resources that we have, we can't work with every platform. Um, for instance, one and I thought was really interesting is that NBC worked with Reddit. We didn't necessarily work with Reddit because again, we
yeah,
had to focus on the platforms that provided us with the immediate KPIs that we value, and
yeah.
it's a tough one. So yeah, consistency in the value of our assets, but also leaning in on what makes a specific platform its authenticity so as to not replicate every deal, which takes more time.
Yeah,
It would be much easier to say, let's apply the same logic to everyone. Here's the deal. You take it, you don't. Thank you. We want this revenue, this engagement, and that's
yeah.
it. But we try to avoid this model because, again, ultimately every platform is I believe very different from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, like you said, just like you said, you didn't necessarily work with Reddit directly yourself, but I'm sure there's learning that you saw based on what NBC did with Reddit as well that then goes into the mix, right? And I think it's similar to what you said there. You tested stuff out in Singapore for the esports Olympics, which then allowed you to go, okay, we can formulate something here for Milano, which then becomes a proof point about how you've done things. And I'm sure you've come out of that now, you're thinking, there's loads of things we would tweak, change, add, do differently. So going into LA 28, right? Because that's going to be the next. I'm sure there'll be things in between, right? I know you've got other things that are always going on as well, which allows you to test and learn. Um, where is the mindset now towards LA 28, right? Look, so Paris 24 was in a lot of ways a breakout for the creator economy stuff. Then you've gone into Milano and you've done what you've done at Milano. What have those unlocked now as you're looking towards LA 28? What are the things you're thinking, yeah, we can do more of that, or are we actually that, that's not something that we need to do now because the world has changed?
Um, some of the evolutions that happened between Paris 24 and LA 28 is what I think is important is how the perception of the platforms also changed in the way MRHers are seeing it, meaning that there's not necessarily as much competition as there was before. When I mentioned earlier about their maturity, the relation also matured. It feels less of a threat to have content online as before. We were very wary of what we would
Yeah,
do. Everything was very contained. Of course, we made making sure that whatever we do benefits for a majority of stakeholders. But um, for the creator program, for instance, what we wanted to do is making sure it was not only for us to do this kind of program, but enabling others to do it. And hopefully this pushed our MRHs and tops to engage differently. Now for LA 28, one thing that I would love to do is to think about creators differently. It's gonna be
yeah,
it's gonna be La La Land, and there's gonna be massive creators. And the one thing I would hate for us is to become a caricature of what the creator
yeah,
program might be in LA. And especially as we're leaning in a creator athlete transversal, which is becoming clearer and clearer, maybe it's not so much about the novelty of the program, but more what value lies behind it, the purpose of it. Before it was a
yeah,
lot of let's do it because it feels we need to do it. Now is why are we doing it? What's the purpose behind? Who are we serving?
yeah,
Are we allowing the broadcasters to be more visible? Are we allowing the athletes to be more famous or discoverable at much easier rates than before? What is the purpose of those programs? Making sure that
yeah.
quality overtakes quantity. This clearly is going to be one of the directions.
I agree. I always try and think about it. I always try and think about it from almost like a storytelling perspective or stories. Like, if we work with this particular group of people, what stories can they tell that can't be told elsewhere to ultimately then fill that gap? And look, and we know like athletes obviously have that access that no one else has, so that's an obvious. And when you start looking at creators as well, there are, like I said, lots of creators have very niche understandings of very niche things, but they serve a purpose in a certain remit. So it then becomes obvious that actually you can tie them to that story. And I think when you start thinking about it like that from a storytelling perspective, it actually makes it more interesting to think about it as well and how you piece it all together. Because there are infinite stories, right? And you can't tell them all. So then it comes down to actually what are the ones that you, I guess, can pick and realize that I guess all of these things are a bet, right? And you're hoping that when you start planning 2 years out, in 2 years' time, the things that you've planned for are still going to be the things that are right at that particular time. And you'll be pivoting as well as you get closer as well, I'm sure.
Yes, yes. And what's really interesting is that from what I've seen the couple of years I've been here is that we've also evolved in the way that we present ourselves. Um, for a long time, we're in a sports and more than sports, which was very directed outside of games and what the IOC meant to now with the new strategy, a much more focus on really the Olympics and the IOC is sports. We're here to
Yeah.
talk about the games, the athletes, what they represent, and this is a much bigger focus than before, which is what the shift is happening. How can we also service those stakeholders, the athletes, and having more. coherent guidelines so that uh, they're an added value as well on the promotion of the games. This is one of the things where we're really evolving for LA 28 to, like you say, creating a storytelling more than just make big numbers. Uh,
Yeah.
I, I,
Yeah.
I, I really I like big numbers. Obviously, everyone likes big numbers, but they have to have meaning behind. They have to have
Yeah, yeah, of course.
purpose.
Of course. Um, so I imagine as well, like the mix of partners that you're working with is shifting all the time as well. And you'll be thinking now about what are those partnerships you're going to have for LA. And look, and it's not like they just come alive right then because you're working torch to torch all the time anyway. But there'll be new categories coming along. And I know this might not necessarily fit for the Olympic mirror, right? But prediction markets now that have blown up massively, right? And we've seen it's been all over the World Cup that's going on as we record this. Like, are there new categories that start to show themselves to you right now, or do you envisage new categories? Because I imagine probably people are coming to you, right, with things that we're not even seeing necessarily as consumers as obvious categories right now. And yeah, I guess you're trying to sort of work out like which are the ones that we should go after and which are the ones do we leave alone? Because I guess you want to innovate, but at the same time as well, you don't have to jump on everything.
Mhm. Well, and this is an interesting thing. We are a nonprofit organization, and this I didn't understand it at first when I arrived. It took me a couple of months to understand what it meant. It meant that we don't need to do everything.
Yeah,
Uh, I came from Amaury, which is a very commercially uh, driven organization, uh, to one where, yes, we need to make the revenues because we provide 90% of the revenues that we make to the Olympic movement, but uh, we are beyond just a a a simple sports event. We want to make sure that the values we provide outside of the Olympics and within the remit of sports in itself stay coherent, which is why topics such as prediction or betting or anything that has to do with this is still very sensitive internally,
yeah,
and I understand uh, from all organizations their point of views on why they're doing it. But for ours, maybe it makes less sense that for some others. Now, you were talking about the evolution of what is happening. Is what's interesting is that we're seeing new models arise, like the FIFA preferred platform. This is an interesting one to look at,
yeah,
because this is not something that we've
yeah,
done before, and it's something that shows that the platforms are at a level again of maturity where they might want to have more visibility, more stake in this, and just don't want to be the medium that they for so long claim to be, just the interface of the content. Maybe they want to be more, so that's one worth investigating.
No, it is interesting. Actually, I was about to ask you actually. Like, obviously, with the World Cup going on in the US at the moment, obviously the Olympics being in the US, I'd imagine it gives you, I guess, there'll be signals that are probably coming out of that about how things are playing out in that specific territory, which is the same territory, right? About where the Olympics might go or how things might play out. I'm not even going to go down the road of talking about politics, by the way. Let's stay clear of that. Um, I'm thinking more about are there things that you are able to learn from that? Like, are you in contact with FIFA as well? You know, is there a share of knowledge there around putting on these major events and things you can learn from each other when obviously there is a territory you're both going to be activating within a very short space of time?
For sure, between organizations, I think it's important to keep in contact, to understand how they evolve. We also share how we try to work. I mean, it's part of every ecosystem to be able to want to work together if you have the same purpose, which is to amplify the brand, promote the event, and obviously we have so many common points that that we discuss between each other, and we it doesn't mean that we necessarily want to do the same things, but talking to each other is key, especially when we're dealing with the same type of organization. And it doesn't mean that we talk on a weekly basis or even a monthly, but uh, understanding if it also was a success for them, understanding if
Yeah.
the activations that they did, what were the complexities around this? Is this something we should think about? Because we ultimately, those federations are part as well of the Olympic movement, and we want to make sure that all of this is coherent for everyone. But I do see a lot of enthusiasm coming from the platforms on what they did for the World Cup. So clearly there is
Yeah.
a momentum that will have to be seized. And I think LA 28, without even getting to politics, is going to be a big moment. And the platforms having most of their headquarters in LA is going to be interesting as well. I'm sure that they all will want to have something in to show, because it's their home turf.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been fascinating, Yannick, and we obviously I did have a lot of other questions as well, but also mindful of your time as well. So to not keep you too long, because we've been talking for close to an hour now. Before we wrap up on this, like, is there anything on the horizon other than obviously LA 28, but as part of your process in planning for that, that you're excited about that perhaps we haven't touched on? I haven't asked any questions. Is there something in this next couple of years that you're thinking that's one particular area of interest that really excites me as I lead up to that?
I think it's about what excites me is that, as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, it does feel like working with platforms now. They want to be more present than before. Like I said before, they were making
Yeah,
sure that the content was there and they were a conduit. This is how most of the time they want to be perceived as conduit. Now they want to be more than just conduit. They want to be at the front of innovation, and they want to be able to tell the story with the Olympics or with FIFA or whichever organization they're going to be working with. And having that coming from them is really exciting, because then you feel like you can do much more, and you're not trying to convince everyone, because again, the education being the hardest part, and the one taking the most time, is going to be less time consuming, so that you can spend more time actually working on what could be with them.
yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Yannick, thank you so much for this. I know we talked off camera. You said that as the IOC, you don't do a lot of these things because you tend to show your work through your actions, not necessarily talking about it. So I do appreciate that you've taken an hour to talk about the things that you're working on. Um, the report that we've talked about and we've touched on is available at Olympics.com, but we will put a link on our page as well. Yannick, I know you do talk on LinkedIn about some of the things you do as well. So we will put a link there to your profile as well if anyone wants to follow you and see the journey over the next few years all the way to LA 28. As ever, if anyone's got any questions or any feedback, or if anyone wants to join us as a guest, you can email us at hello@attentionshift.media. You can DM me. But Yannick, thank you so much for your time and good luck as you prepare for LA 28 and beyond. It sounds like it's going to be fascinating.
Thank you so much for having me, and glad I could provide a little bit of how things work here, because indeed we don't talk a lot at the IUC, or we'd rather let our main partners do the talk for us. But like I said,
Yeah.
happy to provide all the insights.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this. And make sure you smash that bell icon too, so you're always the first to know exactly when a new episode drops.